We are taught to trust a person in a white coat. We see them as healers, as people who have promised to help. They are given power and our faith, and in return, they are supposed to protect our lives. But what happens when that promise is broken? What if the people sworn to heal you decide you are more valuable sick? What if they watch you suffer year after year and call it science? This is not just a question. It is a story about what can happen when good people convince themselves that a terrible thing is the right thing to do. To understand this story, we have to go back in time. The year is 1932. The place is Macon County, Alabama. This was a poor place, especially for the black sharecroppers who worked the land. The Great Depression had hit everyone hard. Many families lived in small shacks with no running water and little food. Going to a doctor was a luxury most could never afford. People suffered and died from illnesses that could have been treated. There was very little hope. Then, one day, hope arrived. Men from the United States government showed up. They were doctors from the Public Health Service. They wore neat clothes and spoke with authority. They came with a special offer for the black men in the county. They said they wanted to treat people for bad blood. Now, bad blood was a local term for all sorts of problems. It could mean being tired or sick or having aches and pains. It was a simple name for a host of unnamed illnesses. The government doctors used this term. They promised free medical exams. They offered free rides to the clinic. They gave out free hot meals on examination days. They even offered money for burial costs to help the families when a man passed away. To the men of Macon County, this felt like a miracle. For the first time in their lives, the government seemed to care about them. Here were important doctors paying attention to their health. Hundreds of men signed up. They were farmers, laborers, and fathers. They trusted the promise of care. They believed they were finally getting the help they had always needed. They put their faith in the hands of these men, believing they would be cured of their bad blood. The promise was a lie. The program was not a treatment program at all. It was a study. Its official name was the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. The doctors were not there to cure anyone. They were there to watch. They wanted to see what would happen to the human body if syphilis was left to run its course, from the first infection until the final autopsy. Syphilis is a serious disease. In its early stages, it can be treated. But if left alone, it creeps through the body over years or even decades. It can attack the heart, the brain, the nerves, and other organs, causing blindness, paralysis, mental breakdown, and eventually, death. The doctors knew this. That was the entire point of their work. They found nearly 400 men who already had syphilis and recruited them into the study. They also recruited over 200 men who did not have the disease to serve as a comparison group. None of the men were ever told the truth. They were never told they had syphilis. They were only ever told they had bad blood. When they went to the clinic for their treatment, they were given useless pills. The doctors called them tonics or aspirin. They were placebos containing no medicine at all. Sometimes, the men were put through painful and dangerous procedures, like spinal taps. They were told these were special treatments. In reality, the doctors were just collecting data, charting the slow decay of the men's bodies. The free meals and burial insurance were not gifts. They were tools to make sure the men kept coming back year after year until they died. The study was designed to last as long as the men did. How could doctors do this? How could men trained to save lives choose instead to watch people suffer and die? The answer is not simple. They were not monsters in a movie. They were educated men, respected in their field. Many of them were probably kind to their own families. They found a way to do a terrible thing by telling themselves a story. The story was that their work was for the greater good. This is a process called rationalization. It is when you invent a good reason for doing a bad thing. The doctors and health officials running the Tuskegee Study told themselves, and each other, that their work was a noble scientific mission. They argued that by studying the full effects of syphilis, they could gain knowledge that might help save thousands of lives in the future. They were sacrificing a few for the good of many. They wrote scientific papers about their findings. They gave presentations at medical conferences. They treated their work like any other important research project. This way of thinking is a part of something called moral disengagement. It's a quiet process where a person disconnects from their own sense of right and wrong. Think of it like turning down the volume on your conscience. You can do this in a few ways. You can change the name of what you are doing. The doctors called their work a study, not withholding treatment. You can ignore or downplay the harm you are causing. They focused on the scientific data, not the pain of the men. You can also shift the blame. Some of the doctors argued that these men were poor and would not have sought treatment anyway, so they were not really being harmed. By using these mental tricks, the doctors could look at their patients and see something else. They did not see a sick man who needed a cure. They saw a research subject. They saw a source of valuable data. Their scientific curiosity became more important than their duty to heal. Over time, this story they told themselves became their truth. They were no longer hurting people. They were serving science. While the doctors saw data, the men in the study lived their lives. They were not just subjects, they were people. Take a man like Charlie Pollard. He was a farmer. He joined the study in his 20s, hoping to get help for what he thought was bad blood. He went to the checkups. He trusted Nurse Eunice Rivers, the friendly local woman who worked with the doctors and served as the main contact for the men. She was one of them, and her presence made the study feel safe. The men called the program Miss Evers's Boys because of her. Charlie Pollard and the others did not know that every visit was just another step in a plan to document their decline. These men worked hard jobs. They raised children. They were part of their communities. They felt the effects of their sickness, but they had no name for it. They grew weaker. Some went blind. Others had trouble walking. Their bodies were failing, and the very people they trusted to help them were simply taking notes. They had been reduced from human beings to objects of study. This process is called dehumanization. It is when you stop seeing the person in front of you as a person. You start to see them as something less, a problem, a number, a thing. It is much easier to harm a thing than it is to harm a person. For the Tuskegee doctors, the men in their study were no longer individuals with hopes, fears, and families. They were a collection of symptoms to be recorded. They were bodies that held the secrets of a disease, and the doctor's job was to unlock those secrets, no matter the human cost. The men in the study were not just sick. They were alone with their sickness, because the truth was kept from them. They lived and died, believing they were receiving care. They trusted until the very end. Their humanity was invisible to the system that used them. The study began in a time before there were good treatments for syphilis. A doctor in the 1930s might have argued, however weakly, that since there was no reliable cure, watching the disease was the only way to learn from it. That argument, as flawed as it was, would completely fall apart in the 1940s. Because in the mid-1940s, a miracle arrived: penicillin. This new drug was a true cure. It was powerful, it was safe, and it was quickly becoming cheap and easy to get. By 1947, penicillin was the standard treatment for syphilis all over the world. The doctors running the Tuskegee Study knew this. They saw it cure soldiers during World War II. They now had a choice to make. They could end the study. They could call in all the men, tell them the truth, and give them the shots of penicillin that would save their lives. It was the clear, moral, and human thing to do. Their duty as doctors demanded it. Or they could continue the study. They chose to continue. This decision marks the darkest turn in the story. The study was no longer about passively watching a disease that had no cure. It was now about actively preventing men from getting a cure that existed. The doctors did not just fail to help, they worked to make sure the men were not helped by anyone else. They sent lists of the men's names to local doctors and health clinics, warning them not to treat these men for syphilis. When some of the men were drafted for the war, the study officials made sure they were kept out of the army so they would not receive the standard military treatment for the disease. For another 25 years, the study went on. Men who could have been cured in a matter of weeks were allowed to suffer for decades. They died, and the doctors collected their bodies for autopsy. The search for knowledge had become a commitment to cruelty. For 40 years, the study continued in secret. But secrets like this cannot last forever. One person can make a difference. That person was Peter Buxton. In the 1960s, he was a young worker for the Public Health Service in San Francisco. One day, he heard about the Tuskegee Study from his coworkers. He was shocked. He could not believe that the same organization he worked for was running such a project. He thought it was a clear moral wrong. He first tried to stop it from the inside. He wrote letters to his superiors, arguing that the study was unethical and had to be stopped immediately. He was told to stay quiet. The study was important, they said, and it had to be completed. But Peter Buxton refused to give up. He knew that what was happening was wrong. After years of being ignored by his bosses, he decided he had to go outside the system. In 1972, he told the story to a journalist named Jean Heller, who worked for the Associated Press. She investigated his claims, found the documents to prove they were true, and wrote the story. On July 25, 1972, the news broke. It was on the front page of newspapers across America. For the first time, the public learned about the 40-year experiment in Macon County. The reaction was immediate. People were horrified. There was a storm of public anger and disbelief. How could this have happened in modern America? The government was forced to act. The public outrage was so great that the study could not continue. It was shut down just a few months after the story was published. The government held hearings in the U.S. Senate to investigate what had gone wrong. The remaining survivors of the study and the families of those who had died sued the government and won a settlement. But the story does not end there. The Tuskegee Study forced the country to look at how it treated people in the name of science. Out of this tragedy came something called the Belmont Report. This report, published in 1979, created a new set of rules for all medical research involving human beings in the United States. It says that all people in a study must be treated with respect. They must be fully informed about what the study is and agree to it, a rule called informed consent. And it says that the risks of a study must not outweigh the possible benefits. These rules are now the foundation of modern medical ethics. Yet, the deepest legacy of Tuskegee is not a government report. It is a feeling. It is the profound and earned distrust of the medical system, especially within the African American community. The story of Tuskegee was passed down through generations. It became a warning: be careful of doctors. Be careful of the government. They do not always have your best interests at heart. This distrust is not just an idea, it has real effects. It can make people hesitate to go to the doctor, to participate in clinical trials for new medicines, or to trust public health advice. The shadow of Tuskegee is long. It reminds us that trust, once broken so badly, can take generations to rebuild. And it leaves us with a final, difficult question. How do we make sure this never happens again? The answer is not just in new rules. It is in remembering stories like this one. It is in remembering that systems are made of people, and people can always choose to do better.